Okay, let's see here. Let's get this all set up. Sorry about this. Just getting the initial setup. How is everybody doing? Let's see if it's showing I'm live. Yes, it is. Okay, hold on. Let me go ahead and get this. Go ahead and share this to a couple places. And then we will get rolling. Okay, let's pull up our stories. And okay. So we've got a lot to talk about today. I'm just going to go ahead and start off into our intro here. We've got actually quite a bit. We've got the long anticipated counteroffensive from Ukraine against the Russians. So we're going to be talking about that as well as the attack on the dam. And give me a second, just tweeting this out. Some of the crazy stuff that's going on between China and the U.S. over in the Strait of Taiwan. Hang on. Just sending this out. All right. So, all right, sorry about that. The Ukrainian counteroffensive. It has officially begun. We've been waiting for this for many months now, and it's officially happened. Originally, it was going to be the spring offensive. I was not too optimistic that it was going to be an early spring offensive for the same reason that the Russians made their fatal mistake of attacking last year in February, which was mud. Ukraine is very, very muddy this time of year, or throughout May, particularly. From February to May, really. And so the Ukrainians waited it out. But I would say that the offensive officially began a few weeks ago, just not with ground troops. They were softening up Russian positions with long range artillery, missile strikes, etc. But it's officially begun. Clearly, Russia has some intelligence that it was going to begin because they destroyed a relatively important dam over in Ukraine, which we're going to talk about as well. But we'll start off with the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Let's see if we can get a particularly good source for this. So we've got Sky News, typically pretty good. Yeah, we'll go ahead and go visit Sky News. All right. No. Uh, sure. Put all the tracking devices on me. I don't care. Right. So, Ukraine war. Putin claims Ukraine launched its counteroffensive but suffered major losses, according to Putin. So fighting has intensified. Oh, never mind. Sky News just has a video. They don't actually have an article. That's kind of lame. Do we have anyone else? BBC. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, Russian President Vladimir Putin seems to think that the offensive has begun. Oh my gosh, BBC, please, maybe later. Um, let's see. Quote: We can definitely state that this Ukrainian offensive has begun, he said in a video interview published on Telegram on Friday. In some ways, hold on a second, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this for later. In some ways, it's already been underway for some weeks. I actually agree with Ukraine conducting what's known in military jargon as shaping operations, long-range artillery and missile attacks on key Russian logistical targets far beyond behind the front lines. This is exactly what we just talked about. Monday seemed to herald a change, with small detachments of lightly armored Ukrainian units moving forward across open fields. I apologize. Towards Russian fortifications in southern Ukraine, southeast of Zaporizhzhia. Quote, the so-called fighting reconnaissance stage is taking place along the entire length of the front. Sergei Kuzum, co-founder and chairman of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center, told the BBC. That means that they're probing of the Russian defenses. Some videos and accounts suggested they quickly ran into trouble. Quote, somewhere this happens more successfully with small losses, Mr. Kuzin said, and somewhere less successfully where the Russians fight back. Mr. Kuzin declined to name specific towns, saying only that they were all in the area of Zaporizhzhia. So this is an area that's been under Russian control for quite some time. It's north of Crimea by some ways. My goodness, I am so sorry. I did not sleep last night. Busy day. Anyway. But by Tuesday, the world's attention was captured by the destruction of the dam at Nova Kazovskia. Sorry, let's try that again. By Tuesday, the world's attention was captured by the destruction of the dam at Nova Kakhanovzia. I'm going to just go with that. And the subsequent flooding that soon covered around 230 square miles or 596 square kilometers either side of the Dnipro River. So, yes, this is, I believe, our next topic. Is this our next topic? Maybe. So, the article continues, for all the Kremlin's denials, it didn't look like a coincidence. The dam and the road across it offered a possible line of attack for Ukrainian forces looking for ways to keep Russian forces off balance. Let's go down. Which is true, by the way. Without this dam, they can't just cross it. This was deep behind Russian lines. We'll get into why I'm pretty sure it was the Russians that did this in the next story. But with the dam gone, you can't just drive across it. You can't do you can't do an amphibious crossing of the reservoir because it's draining too quickly, and once it's emptied, you'll have very thick mud on the bottom that you can't drive across. And anywhere downstream, either the water is moving too fast to do any kind of a crossing, and likewise, once it drains, you'll have a lot of mud. So they have effectively cut off an entire avenue of advance by that the Ukrainians might have had. Let's see. For all the Kremlin's denials, it didn't look like a coincidence. The dam and the road across it offer possible line of attack for Ukrainian forces looking for ways to keep the Russians off balance. It seems likely that Russian forces, which controlled the dam, decided to blow it up, taking one of Kyiv's military operations off the table. Kyiv had already signaled its interest in this stretch of the front line for far more than once. Now, it's worth noting that this dam controlled quite a bit going downstream. So, if the Ukrainians managed to get across it and then continue to push south, they could have encircled a large amount of Russian forces. Or trapped them into Crimea, which would have been an absolute embarrassment for Russian forces. So, right. Let's see. In late April, Ukrainian soldiers crossed the river and briefly established a beachhead at Olinsky. Ukraine also took control of several small islands in the Dnipro Delta close to Kherson. The exact extent of Kyiv's military plans for this area are not known, and it is now academic. The catastrophic flooding will have made river crossings impossible for the time being. Quote, but the fact that such a direction was an option was seen by the Russians, Mr. Kuzin said. With the authorities in Kyiv suddenly grappled with the flooding, the fighting continued and seemed to escalate further east. By early Thursday morning, the UK's Ministry of Defense tweeted that, quote, heavy fighting continues along multiple sectors of the front, adding that in most areas Ukraine holds the initiative. In a video the same day, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that Russian forces had repelled an overnight Ukrainian attack in the area south of Zaporizhzhia. Again, I am so sorry. I am terrible at pronouncing anything, including my own language, involving around 150 armored vehicles and 1,500 troops. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade made an attempt to break through the Russian lines. Actually, you know what? I'm going to highlight this because this is more interesting than the Telegram thing. Let's see. A video circulated on the internet perpetuating to show something new, a Western-supplied Leopard tank being destroyed. The BBC has not verified the video. I've seen it. It actually does seem to be legit. It was a column of several Leopard tanks and American-made M113 APCs, and they were struck by artillery. Let's see. Ukrainian officials, characteristically tight-lipped about current operations, offered tantalizing glimpses into what was going on. Hanna Meyer, the deputy defense minister, coyly said that Russian forces were, quote, actively on the defensive in the area surrounding the town of Oretskiv, around 65 kilometers southeast of Zaporizhzhia. In a statement on Telegram, she also confirmed that battles were continuing around Volynskaya, Novitskaya, further east. The two towns likely form the western and eastern edges of a heavily fortified stretch of the front line where many analysts believe Ukraine will eventually try to punch through Russian lines. Quote, "It's not a secret that one of our main goals is to cut the land corridor that feeds the whole southern grouping of enemy forces," Mr. Curzon said. Here you go. You have a German Leopard tank here in this picture. Pro-Russian Telegram channels in the Donbass were full of excited clatter about Ukraine's latest moves, much of it laced with scorn. Quote, "They're going to be where the Russians are waiting for them," one member posted in the I Love Krymskaya group. "What stupidity." Others acknowledged that Ukrainian forces had moved forward but questioned the price and lost men and armor. I really question the price of the success," another member of the same group commented. "Do they have enough forces to reach Tomak, 44 kilometers south of Aritsk, let alone Bryansk and Mariupol?" But it's not the only area where fighting is raging. Footage from north and south of the city of Bakhmut, seen one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war, appeared to show Ukrainian forces moving forward. Mrs. Mayer said they had advanced from 200 to 1,100 meters in various sections. Now, worth noting there, this is an area where the trench networks on both sides were so extensive that typically a 100-meter gain was considered a success in the military operation, very much like World War I. So a 1,100-meter sprint into enemy territory is actually fairly significant. Let's see. In what may eventually be an effort to encircle the city and trap its Russian occupiers. The Russians did take the city recently, but yeah, if they got completely encircled, it would all have been for nothing. It is, as the UK's Ministry of Defence noted, quote, a highly complex operational picture. But does it mean that Ukraine's counteroffensive is already entering a dramatic new phase? On Wednesday, Lensky Danilov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, scoffed at the idea. Quote, "All of this is not true," he told Reuters. "When we start the counteroffensive, everyone will know about it. They will see it." But something's definitely changed. Quote, "The point, that is, the front is usually moving," Curzon said, adding that several options were still open to Ukrainian commanders. The Ukraine is also operating under a number of significant restraints, the main one being the lack of fighter jets capable of providing support from the air. "That's why we're moving slowly," Curzon said, and then move in air defense systems closer. Which, again, a lot of people will say if they had F-16s, this would change things. It absolutely would not. I truly believe the F-16 Fighting Falcon, or Viper, is superior in dogfighting and beyond visual range combat to any aircraft that the Russian Federation is flying. However, the Russian Federation have long-range aerial-equipped radar, which can vector them onto targets more effectively, where Ukraine doesn't have that ability. And Russia also has modernized air-to-air missiles, including hypersonics, which are very difficult to dodge for fighter jets. So it still would be difficult. But this tactic they're doing, this kind of leapfrog where they slowly move forward, then they establish surface-to-air systems, very smart, probably pretty effective as well. Another factor is time. The offensive will probably last no more than 5 months, after which autumn rain will once again render open ground impassable for heavy armored vehicles. What will success look like? If Ukrainian forces can punch through Russian lines all the way to the Sea of Azov, then any Russian troops west of the breach will suddenly be much more vulnerable, dependent entirely on supply lines through the Crimean Peninsula. And that would mean, Mr. Curzon says, would be to destroy the Kerch Bridge linking Russia with Crimea, briefly disabled by a huge truck bomb last October, and attack ships and planes being used to ferry supplies to the peninsula. Quote, that would be the end, he says, but don't expect this to happen soon. It'll take months. Yeah, no, if they take the Kerch Bridge out and Ukrainian forces push all the way to the neck of the Crimean Peninsula, Russian forces would be trapped there because Russian ships would not even be able to land effectively to relieve troops or reinforce or give ammunition because they would be within range of Ukrainian anti-ship missiles. So, yeah, the battle is all about the Kerch Bridge. If the Ukrainians reach the Sea of Azov, Crimea is as good as done. It'll be a siege at that point. The Ukrainians can just wait them out. Eventually, they'll surrender the territory. But I wanted to go back up here to where the Russian defense minister said that there was a Ukrainian attack involving 150 armored vehicles and 1,500 troops. These are oddly specific numbers to me. If you said 150 armored vehicles, I would believe you. If you said 1,500 troops, I would believe you as well. When you say 1,500 troops and 150 armored vehicles, it's a little strange to me because these numbers are quite similar. It's literally the same number with an extra zero on it. Those are the kinds of things you have to look for when you're looking for fabricated numbers, as things that seem lazily put together. So I'm a little dubious about that claim. We know Russia exaggerates some of their battlefield successes anyway. So does Ukraine, by the way. Any fighting force will do this. So just something I saw and I wanted to bring up there for a second. So that's the counteroffensive has begun. Now onto the bridge. Again, there is a lot of buzz going on right now about who actually took the bridge out. So let's see if we can find a relatively okay, I actually can't find a news outlet that I trust on this whole dam situation, but I will tell you my reasons for believing that this dam had to have been destroyed by the Russians. It was destroyed within 2 days of the beginning of the counteroffensive, the ground counteroffensive, which is very convenient for the Russians. Again, the fact I have to explain this at all is ludicrous, but bear with me. It barred 3 avenues of approach for the Ukrainians. It allowed the Russians to bolster their defense of Crimea by flooding huge amounts of things downstream of it, taking an entire front offline. It renders an entire fourth of Ukraine's farming worthless because they no longer have the water to supply that agriculture. This is not the first time the Russians have done this in Ukraine. In 1941, the Russians bombed a dam in Ukraine to slow German forces that were moving through. That resulted in the death of up to, I think it was 200,000 Ukrainians to famine. So that Ukraine would do this on themselves makes no sense in that regard unless they really wanted to just give an advantage to the Russians. Additionally, this is in Russian-controlled territory. Again, they did say that the Ukrainians had made a couple of advances in the region in the past, but nothing on the scale that you would need for this. Dams are enormous. This one, I believe, is around 1,500 meters in diameter, and dams are big. Like at the you see this at the top, but they get huge at the bottom. If you were to drain a reservoir and look, like they can be 200, 300, 400 feet thick at the bottom because they have to hold all that weight in. It's also reinforced concrete with steel in it and everything. The only way you could take something out like this effectively is if you got inside with probably 2 semi-trucks worth of explosives and you blew this thing up in probably the turbine rooms. The claims that the Ukrainians had done this when it's enemy-occupied territory, some of the claims I've seen as well, they did it with air power. We just read that the Ukrainians don't have a lot of that, but even if they did, you can't do that kind of damage with the sorts of weapons that Ukraine has. I think even some American bunker busters would struggle to take the dam out entirely. You could cause some smaller holes to form in it and some slow flooding, which would eventually amount to big flooding, but you'd have a lead-up period. It wouldn't happen, boom, all at once. You'd have failure points here, here, and here, and then it would go. I think the only weapon short of a nuclear weapon that I could see that could do this all in once from the air would be the United States Air Force's heavy bunker buster, which I think the B-2 Spirit carries, and the thing is like 10,000 pounds or heavier, something ridiculous like that. But yeah, no, this was destroyed from the inside. The Ukrainians did not do this. That would be one of the greatest coups of military success ever. And, there are the people that are in bad faith saying that the Ukrainians did this, but I really do believe there are a lot of people, even some very smart people, who have very large follower bases, who are claiming otherwise because, A, they have a huge bias against the Ukrainian government. I don't blame them. The Ukrainian government does have some corruption problems. And they're also not very well versed in these types of operations. So I like to give the benefit of the doubt to people when I can, but there are definitely some trolls on the subject. Moving on. So this is from the Jerusalem Post, and it's that Russian forces are repeatedly shelling an ammonia pipeline in Ukraine's Kharkiv region, says the governor. The ammonia pipeline, the world's longest, stretches about 2,470 kilometers, or 1,534 miles in American freedom units, from Russia's, from Russia's Tugliti on the Volga River to 3 Black Sea ports. Russian forces repeatedly fired at an ammonia pipeline, Ukraine's Kharkiv region, a local governor said on Tuesday. Conduit potentially crucial for the extension of a deal allowing the safe export of grains and fertilizers to the Black Sea ports. This is completely predictable, and we will probably talk about it by the end. This isn't a very long one. So, yeah. The extension next month to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, a pact struck in July 2022 to help tackle global food crises, could hinge on the reopening of the pipeline. The ammonia pipeline, the world's longest, it says, has been shut down since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Leakage from the ammonia pipeline. So there is no recorded leakage from the late Tuesday shelling that hit the pipeline near the village of Meskia on an overnight shelling near the village of Zapyrin near this place. The governor of Ukraine's Kharkiv region said, there is no threat to people's lives and health, said on Telegram messaging app. So this is a little clickbaity, but I wanted to talk about it anyway, because not too long ago, the Russians employed the Kinzhal missile. They've done it several times, which is considered to be an unstoppable missile, hypersonic missile, to hit targets deep within Ukraine. Since American Patriot missile sites have gone up, the success rate of these missiles has gone down dramatically. Russia can no longer threaten the interior infrastructure of Ukraine, their power grid, their airports, etc., because it's now defended by one of the best, in fact, I'm going to say the best integrated air defense system in the world, the Patriot system. It's very good. So the next form of warfare that the Russians have to attack the Ukrainians and their allies, because from the Russian perspective, and somewhat rightfully so, they're fighting the world, right? Like, yes, it's Ukrainians fighting, but they're being armed by everyone else. So the Russians, they have nothing to lose from their perspective. So one of the next ways they can put the screws to their enemy is to starve them out or to freeze them out, which is why there was a lot of suspicion on the Russians taking on the Nord Stream pipeline to try and put pressure on Europe to stop backing the Ukrainians. We still don't know exactly who did that. There's a lot of fingers pointing to the Russians. There's a lot of fingers pointing to the British instantly. There's some pointing to the U.S. Recently, there's some pointing to the Ukrainians themselves. So a very interesting bit there, but that's not what the story is about. But this grain deal, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, there's a lot of food crises going on in the world. The U.S. is relatively insulated from a lot of it. A lot of Europe is too, especially the well-developed parts of Europe. But the less wealthy you get, the more of Ukraine's grain, especially, you relied on. So when the Black Sea got shut down, the Russians started targeting cargo vessels carrying grain and the infrastructure in the ports. It was a big deal. It threatened millions of lives across the globe, potentially billions. And so I frankly am very surprised that the Russians even agreed to an extension. This thing was brokered by Turkey, who's kind of always sits on the fence between NATO and Russia. But now that the counteroffensive is going, I always expected that Russia was going to start hitting the agricultural infrastructure of Ukraine as soon as the counteroffensive started. This is their most effective weapon they have now. Moving on to the next story. Ukraine says it has intercepted a call saying that Russia blew up the dam. So we've got the New York Post, relatively factual somewhat. I mean, it says mixed, but we'll see here. Ukraine claimed on Friday that it intercepted a telephone call between Russian soldiers that confirms Moscow's saboteurs destroyed the dam, as Norwegian seismologists revealed that they had detected a possible blast around the time of the dam's breach. Like I said, this would have to be an enormous explosion to take out an entire dam this size. Let's see, Ukraine's domestic security agency, the SBU, posted a 1.5 minute audio recording on its Telegram channel in which two men are heard discussing in Russian the aftermath of the dam collapse. Quote, Ukrainians didn't strike it. That was our sabotage group, says one of the men in the call, described by the SBU as a Russian serviceman. Quote, they wanted to, scare people with that dam. It didn't go according to plan, and they did more than they planned for, he adds. Discussing the fallout from the destruction of the dam, the man on the recording comments that thousands of animals had been killed at a safari park downstream. Terrible, and I mean lots of people. So those of you who are watching, you can see the dam when it started, when it was in working order or starting to flood. I believe this is when it's starting to flood. I'm not sure. No, it was in working order in the first photo. And you can see what's left of it now. It's gone. It was destroyed and blown up in multiple areas. So, yeah, the man on the other end of the line then expresses surprise at the soldiers' claim that the Russians had destroyed the dam, which had been under their control since the first months of the invasion. The Post could not independently verify the recording. Moscow has not commented on the contents of the phone call. Well, of course they haven't. So, yeah, and then they have some background on the offensive. Oh, man, we've got a lot of pictures of the flooding damage. Terrible, terrible stuff. This doesn't necessarily mean anything because it could be fabricated, right? But again, it just makes sense that the Russians are the ones that did it. But we've beaten this topic enough. We're going to move on once again to the same region of the world. We've got a lot of Central and Eastern European news today, and it's also been a number of weeks since we've gotten to do this show, so there's a lot of news to cover, which is why I'm kind of bam, 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 rapid firing through it. Putin says Russian tactical nuclear weapons to be deployed to Belarus next month. So, yeah, this is definitely interesting. I'm not entirely sure what to think of it. I've talked about how I think the deployment of these weapons is more a message to Belarus than it is to NATO before, but we can get into that in a minute once we find a somewhat good one to read here. We've got the Political Wire. They're central. They are high factuality. I'm using Ground News, by the way. Fantastic way to try and sort through bias and whatnot. So let's see. This is by the Political Wire. Russia, and it's just a tiny little blurb here. Russia deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Quote, Russia will start deploying nuclear weapons in Belarus after special storage facilities are made ready on July 7th to July 8th, President Vladimir Putin said on Friday. Moscow's first move of such warheads outside of Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union, Reuters reports. The reason I think this is a message to Belarus is Russia has been attempting to kind of overtake Belarus in their relationship for a long time. Belarus has been very concerned about its border with NATO, particularly with Poland, because Poland has been like a ravenous attack dog wanting to get into the fight and having to be held back by the rest of NATO. I don't blame the Poles, by the way, because they've been invaded enough times to know where this goes, So I think the deployment of nuclear weapons is an assurance to Belarus from Moscow to basically say, we have your back, NATO's not going to touch you. I don't think it's as much of a message to NATO as it is to Belarus. I mean, yeah, it's a message to NATO as well, saying, hey, we have nuclear weapons here. The Russian Federation has long violated the Intermediate Ballistic Missile Treaty that was signed during the mid to late Cold War after the Able Archer incident almost caused World War III. And the United States, having put up with this for some time, finally decided in, I think it was 2017, to pull out of that treaty because they'd had enough. Look, you're clearly not abiding by it. We're not going to either. Does that make the world a more dangerous place? Yes, it does. But that's where we are. Moving on. All right, so we have this thing with Kosovo that happened. It's probably still going on. I have not gotten to hear nearly as much about it as I would like. But some NATO troops were attacked in Kosovo. So let's see. This is from the 1st of June. So this is somewhat old news now. But again, we haven't done this in a couple weeks. So I want to get through some stories. I might skim through this one, depending on how long it is. But, yeah, Kosovo. NATO ready to send more troops after unrest. NATO says it's ready to send more troops to Kosovo after unrest following the appointment of ethnic Albanian mayors to the majority Serb areas. President Belgrade have blamed each other for the unrest, with Serbian leader Vuk calling for the mayor's removal. The U.S. has also criticized their installation, which came after Serb residents boycotted local polls. Kosovo declared independence in 2008, but Serbia does not recognize it. NATO has already sent 700 reinforcements to Kosovo, but NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said more might be needed. The alliance already has some 4,000 troops there. Mayors were elected after the Serbs in northern Kosovo boycotted local elections, depressing turnout to about 3% and leading to ethnic Albanian candidates to be elected. Serb protesters then tried to stop them from taking up their posts. Some 30 NATO peacekeepers and more than 50 Serb protesters were hurt in the ensuing clashes. Speaking on the sidelines of European summit in Moldova, Mirziyoyev said withdrawing the mayors would be the most powerful way to diffuse tensions. He insisted that his country would, quote, attempt to persuade the Serbs to protest calmly and peacefully. But at the same event, the Kosovoan president, Vojta Osmani, blamed Belgrade for the recent violence, accusing it of, quote, supporting criminal gangs in the country. Serbia needs to come to terms with its past, he said, adding that the real threat, in fact, is coming from Serbia's denial of existence of a sovereign state. The U.S., which had backed Kosovo's independence from Serbia, criticized Kosovo's decision to install the ethnic Albanian mayors in northern Kosovo by forcible means and expelled Kosovo from participating in an ongoing American-led military exercise in Europe. Serbia's ally, Russia, has called for the rights of ethnic Serbs in Kosovo to be respected. I think a lot of this is being orchestrated by the Russian Federation. I have nothing to prove that. Putting the theory hat on. This is Russia's calling card right here. Russia has called for the rights of ethnic Serbs in Kosovo to be respected. I have some criticisms about this whole situation myself, but, if people don't go to the polls, they don't go to the polls. But the the Russians, it's so interesting that all of a sudden this Kosovo-Serbia thing that's been settled for decades pops up again a year after the invasion of Ukraine in a area that is strategically important to the Russians. Oh, if they can weaken that area and eventually walk into Moldova, Romania, they will do it. So this is very interesting. We actually don't have a whole lot here, so we just may as well continue here. Following the violence, Serbian tennis star Novak Dovkiak drew attention to the situation by writing, quote, Kosovo is the heart of Serbia. Stop the violence, after his first round win at the French Open. The tennis player, whose father was born in Kosovo, later said, of course it hurts me very much as a Serb to see what's happening in Kosovo, the way our people have been practically expelled from the municipal offices. So the least I could do was this. On Wednesday, following criticism from France's sports minister, he said it was an issue he, quote, stands for, although he was aware that some would disagree with his action. Let's see. So, yeah, that's the end of that story. I see puppet strings being pulled on all sides of this one. Something to keep an eye on, right? Because we haven't heard about this in the headlines for about a week now, a little over a week, but it's not going to go away, and unfortunately, I could see it getting worse. But moving on. All right, we're finally moving away from Europe. So, Taiwan and the United States signed first deal under new trade framework. So we're going to go to the voice of, VOA. Okay. So U.S.-Taiwan's signed trade deal over China's opposition. From Washington, the United States signed a trade agreement on Thursday with Taiwan over opposition from China, which claims the self-ruled island democracy is part of its own territory. The two governments say the U.S.-Taiwan initiative on 21st century trade will strengthen commercial relations by improving customs, investment, and other regulation. The measure was signed by employees of the unofficial entities that maintain relations between the United States and Taiwan, a center for high-tech industry. They will have no formal diplomatic ties but maintain unofficial relations and have billions of dollars of annual trade. Can we just drop the charade at this point? Like, come on. Can we just, it's like, look, the United States clearly supports Taiwan, whatever. Anyway, the agreement is intended to strengthen and deepen economic trade and relationship, the Office of the United States Trade Representative said in a statement. The deputy of the USTR, Sarah Binaxi, attended the signing. Can I say anymore? The Chinese government accused Washington of violating agreements on Taiwan's status and demanded the U.S. government stop official contact with the island's elected government. Taiwan and China split in 1949 after a civil war. The island has never been part of the People's Republic of China, but the mainland's ruling Communist Party says it is obliged to unite China by force if necessary. Unfortunately, due to one Henry Kissinger giving advice to President Nixon, this is a very muddy area legally. Chinese leader Xi Jinping's government has stepped up efforts to intimidate Taiwan by flying fighter jets and bombers near the island. American and European politicians have visited Taiwan in a show of support for its elected government. Quote, the United States should stop any form of official exchanges with Taiwan and refrain from sending wrong signals to the Taiwan Independent Secessionist Forces, said a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Mao Ning. So, yeah, Taiwan. Can we just stop pretending that the United States does not officially recognize China? It's kind of silly at this point, right? Like, the U.S. does. And this is a good step, in my opinion. This is a very good step. Taiwan is very important to the world. They are the microprocessor capital of the world. That's one of the reasons China wants them very bad right now, because China's microchip processing industry has not been doing very well. A lot of the world's hasn't, actually, but if you take Taiwan, you can monopolize the entire world's microchips to an extent, right? The more complex ones, like cheap ones that are like in a TV remote and stuff like that, most countries can make those. But when it comes to the cutting edge, high end chips that are used in like highly advanced computers, technology, things for banking, etc., weapons, a lot of that comes from Taiwan. Moving on. So there's still no breakthrough in the NATO-Turkey talks about Sweden joining. A lot of people thought that Turkey would after Erdogan got elected, but they do not appear to have budged on get out here, Al Jazeera, on the issue. So the story is from Al Jazeera. NATO chief urges Turkey not to veto Sweden joining the alliance. Stoltenberg says Sweden has, quote, fulfilled its obligations, but made no breakthrough in talks with Turkey's Erdogan. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has urged Turkey not to veto Sweden's bid to join the military alliance ahead of its meeting this month to try and overcome objections delaying Stockholm's membership. Quote, membership will make Sweden safer, but also make NATO and Turkey stronger, Secretary General Stoltenberg told journalists in Istanbul on Sunday after meeting Turkish President Erdogan and his newly appointed foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, the former head of the intelligence agency. Let's see. Quote, I look forward to finishing Sweden's accession as soon as possible, Stoltenberg said. Officials from Turkey, Sweden, and Finland will meet next week to attempt to resolve the issues that have delayed Sweden's NATO membership, said Stoltenberg, referring to the permanent joint mechanism set up to address Turkey's concerns about Sweden and Finland. In March, Turkey ratified Finland's bid for membership and it became NATO's 31st member in April. All 31 member countries must ratify a candidate's accession protocol for it to join the transatlantic alliance. Turkey's government accuses Sweden of being too lenient on terrorist organizations and security threats, including Kurdish groups and people associated with a 2016 coup attempt. Hungary has also delayed its approval, but the reasons why haven't been made publicly clear. Quote, Sweden has taken significant concrete steps to meet Turkey's concerns, said Stoltenberg, noting that the country has amended its constitution, strengthened its anti-terror laws, and lifted an arms embargo on Turkey since it applied for to join NATO just over a year ago. NATO wants to bring Sweden into the fold by the time the United States President Joe Biden and other leaders meet in Lithuania on July 11th through the 12th. Fearing they might be targeted by Moscow after Russia invaded Ukraine last year, Sweden and Finland abandoned their territorial positions of military non-alignment to seek protection under NATO's security umbrella. So, yeah, it's interesting. Finland and Sweden, rather, have always been very, very close, at least in modern times. And the agreement between the two countries always is that if one was going to join, they both were going to join. So the fact that this hasn't happened yet has got to be very infuriating, because this is by no fault of Finland. And if it is true that Sweden has met all of the demands that Turkey has, then it's kind of improper for Turkey to continue to hold them to that. Let's see here. Let's see. So Finland has become the 31st country to join the world's largest military alliance. The Nordic nation shares a 1340 kilometer border with Russia, which has long complained about NATO's eastward expansion. It is very ironic that Russia claims to invade Ukraine because they don't want more border space with NATO, which triggers the largest expansion growth, the near doubling of border sharing with Russia ever. Although, the one thing that's always made me kind of curious about the invasion in Ukraine is the Russians say they did it to stop eastward expansion, and that if they did it, they wouldn't have to share. They were afraid of sharing a border with NATO, but if they took over Ukraine, they would share a border with Poland and Romania. But anyway, moving on. Strassenberg held talks in Istanbul. Hundreds of people, including dozens of pro-Kurdish protesters, gathered in Stockholm to demonstrate against Sweden's planned NATO membership. Up to 500 people took part in the No to NATO, No Erdogan laws in Sweden protest. They rallied under the banner of the Alliance Against NATO, an umbrella for Kurdish organizations, leftist groups, anarchists, youth and climate activists, and people opposed to Sweden's new anti-terror laws, which took effect on June 1st, as well as those calling for free media. In January, a protest in Stockholm involving the burning of a copy of the Quran brought Sweden's membership talks at NATO to a grinding halt after Erdogan suspended the meetings. The incident led to anti-Sweden demonstrations around the Muslim world. Strassenberg appeared to suggest that the protests might have been raised during his talks. Quote, "I understand it's hard to see demonstrations against Turkey and against NATO in Sweden," Strassenberg said, "but let me be clear. Freedom of assembly and expression are core values in our democratic societies. These rights must be protected and upheld." On Saturday, Strassenberg attended the inauguration of Erdogan, who was reelected to serve a third presidential term and another 5 years in office. So, yes, it seems that officially Sweden cannot join NATO yet. However, that's not really slowing NATO down, or Sweden. NATO may base troops in Sweden before Stockholm joins, says government. So let's go to the Times of India for this one. Hold on one second here. I'm going to get free access to a month. Oh, am I not allowed here? Oh, I guess we're not allowed in the Times of India. Can I reopen close tab? Okay. TASS. No. Print, base troops, and I guess we're going to the print. Are we allowed to read here? Okay. All right. NATO may base troops in Sweden before Stockholm joins, government says. This is a report from Stockholm. Sweden will allow NATO to base troops on its territory even before formally joining the Defense Alliance, the Prime Minister and Defense Minister said on Friday. Sweden applied last year to join NATO as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Objections from Turkey and Hungary have delayed the bid, and Sweden now hopes to join by a NATO summit in Lithuania next month. Quote, "The government has decided that the Swedish armed forces may undertake preparations with NATO and NATO countries to enable future joint operations. Prime Minister Ule, oh, I'm so sorry, Kristersson, and Defense Minister Pal Johnson said, quote, preparations may consist of temporary basing of foreign equipment and personnel on Swedish territory. The decision sends a clear signal to Russia and strengthens Sweden's defense, they said in an opinion piece in the Daily Dagens Nyheter. I am so sorry for mispronouncing everything I say. Russia would, for the foreseeable future, remain a threat against neighboring countries, they said, and were uncertain about the extent of President Vladimir Putin's territorial ambitions. Fellow Nordic country Finland, which has a long border with Russia, joined NATO in April. So, yeah. So officially, Sweden is not joining NATO. Unofficially, they're not waiting. It seems like they're already retooling their military, and they're going to allow NATO forces in Sweden. I bet a lot of them are going to be Finnish forces, if I'm going to be honest, but probably some US, some UK in there as well. Okay. We are moving on. Back to the Pacific here. This is from a few days ago. Let's see. From the Military Times. Are we allowed to read here? Yes, we are. Okay, so China responds to U.S. complaint over aircraft intercept. So yeah, if we zoom in here, you can actually see there's a Chinese. What are they? J11, J15. I can't remember the Su-27 designation that they have, but flying right off the nose of an American aircraft. Yeah, in this image from video provided by the U.S. Navy, a Chinese J-16, there you go, it was close, fighter flies aggressively close to U.S. RC-135 aircraft flying in international airspace over the South China Sea on Friday, May 26th, 2023. So, Beijing responded Wednesday to complaints from the United States about a Chinese fighter's dangerous interception of a U.S. Air Force reconnaissance aircraft in international airspace over the South China Sea by demanding an end to such flights. The incident adds to military, diplomatic, and economic tensions between the countries over U.S. support for self-governing Taiwan, China's refusal to engage in dialogue between their armed forces, and Beijing's flying of a suspected spy balloon over the U.S. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning told reporters at a daily briefing that China would keep taking measures it deems necessary to safeguard its sovereignty. Quote, the U.S. should immediately stop these dangerous provocations, Mao said. This is the provocation. The plane is not. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command called the Chinese plane's actions, quote, an unnecessarily aggressive maneuver, adding to complaints that China's military has become significantly more aggressive over the past 5 years, intercepting U.S. aircraft and ships in the region. China says it owns the South China Sea virtually in its entirety, a claim not recognized internationally and directly challenged by nations along its coast, including the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. In a statement Tuesday, the U.S. military said the pilot of the Chinese J-16 fighter jet flew directly in front of the nose of the RC-135 conducting routine operations in international airspace last Friday. Military-to-military contacts between the sides have all but evaporated in recent years amid a historic decline in governmental relations, even as trade and personal exchanges remain strong. Further dampening prospects for a reduction in tensions, China said its defense chief would not meet with U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin when the two men attend a security conference in Singapore over the weekend. Austin was scheduled to address the Sri Lanka dialogue on Saturday, while Chinese Defense Minister Jen Li Shangfu will speak at the gathering on Sunday. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said on Wednesday that the plane incident showed why it is vital for the U.S. and China to maintain dialogue at senior level in order to prevent miscommunication and avoid miscalculations, that could lead to conflict. He said it was regrettable that Beijing had rejected Austin's request for a meeting with Chinese defense minister. Quote, I think it only underscores why it is so important that we have regular open lines of communication, including the way between our defense ministers, Blinken said in a news conference at the end of the EU-US trade and technology meeting in Lewis, Sweden. Quote, hey, there's Sweden again. As we've said repeatedly, we have real competition with China. We also want to make sure that doesn't veer into conflict, and the most important starting point for that are regular lines of communication, he said. China has said that the U.S. is entirely responsible for the breakdown in communications, but has not publicly given a reason. With its People's Liberation Army as the world's largest standing military, which answers directly to the ruling Communist Party, China frequently challenges military aircraft from the United States and its allies in the South and East China Seas and the Taiwan Strait connecting the two. Such behavior led to a 2001 air collision. I'm glad they brought this up. I was going to if they didn't. Such behavior led to a 2001 in-air collision between a Chinese fighter and U.S. Navy surveillance plane in which the Chinese pilot was lost and the Chinese plane was lost and the pilot killed. In Tuesday's statement, the Indo-Pacific Command said America will continue to fly, sail, and operate safely and responsibly wherever international law allows, and expects all other countries to do the same. Yeah, the thing in 2001, it's really interesting because it was really, everyone forgot about it very quickly because it's like, oh, that's a terrible tragedy. If that happened today, that could potentially lead to war. Like the breakdown in our communications is incredible, just how far it's gone. But we're moving on. The reason I brought this up, even though it's a few weeks old, is because of another one that just happened on June 5th, only a couple days ago. Chinese warship nearly hits U.S. destroyer in Taiwan Strait during joint Canada-U.S. mission. Let's see, do they actually show the video here? No, they don't. This is from Global News. A Chinese warship came within 150 yards of hitting an American destroyer, the USS Changchun, during a rare joint Canada-U.S. mission sailing through the Taiwan Strait, the latest aggressive military move from Beijing in the South China Sea. Global News has been traveling on the HMCS Montreal, the Canadian frigate, participating in the mission since May 25th in the South China Sea, and witnessed the near collision from the barge wing of the ship. The People's Liberation Navy ship picked up considerable speed and cut in front of the bow of the Changchun, a maneuver the HMCS Montreal's commander, Captain Paul Monteford, called not professional. When the Chinese vessel altered its course, Monteford says the crew... Hold on a second. The crew called the American ship and told them to move or there would be collision. The Americans responded by asking the Chinese to stay clear of the ship. The Changchun ultimately needed to alter course and slow down to avoid a crash. Quote, the fact this was announced over the radio prior to doing it clearly indicated that this was intentional. The Changchun and Montreal have been sailing together in the South China Sea for nearly a week prior to entering the Taiwan Strait. Global News has seen Chinese warships shadowing the Canadian vessel on multiple occasions during its transit. The Chinese did not attempt a similar maneuver on the HMCS Montreal, but one of the two warships that were in the sea did sail within 1,000 yards of the Canadian ship, a distance that Monteford believed was safe. The Chinese told both Canadian and American ships over radio systems that they were entering Chinese territory, despite the joint mission taking place in internationally recognized waters, according to Monteford. Quote, I'm hoping that this is an isolated incident that won't happen again. We just read about a dangerous incident with aircraft only a couple weeks prior, so I don't think it's isolated. I'm hoping that this is an isolated incident that won't happen again for us because we have international law on our side, Monteford told Global News. This is international waters. The Chinese don't care about international law. They're trying to make new international law. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, wow, that is one hell of an acronym here. The U.S. Indo-PACOM said in a statement released Saturday the Chinese ship, quote, executed maneuvers in an unsafe manner in the vicinity of Changchun. According to the U.S. Indo-PACOM, the ship overtook the U.S. destroyer on its port side, crossing its bow at 150 yards, prompting the Changchun to maintain course but slow its speed to 10 knots to avoid collision. The Chinese ship then crossed the Changchun's bow a second time starboard to port at 2,000 yards and remained off the destroyer's port bow. The LY-132's closest point of approach was 150 yards, and its actions violated the maritime rules of the road of safe passage in international waters, the statement read. In a statement to Global News, a spokesman for the Chinese embassy in Canada said the Canadian and U.S. ships had hyped the sailing up publicly and added that Chinese naval and air forces have been tracking and monitoring both ships, quote, lawfully and professionally. Relevant countries have been deliberately stirring up troubles and risks in the Taiwan Strait, maliciously undermining regional peace and stability and sending wrong signals to the quote, Taiwanese independence forces, wrote Jianwei Li, deputy director of the embassy's cultural and press section. Jianwei said China had or would take all necessary measures to, quote, firmly respond to all threats and provocations. Canada's Defense Minister Anita Anand had just finished participating in Security Summit in Singapore when she learned of the incident in the Strait of Taiwan. The summit was attended by both U.S. Lloyd Austin and Defense Minister Li Xiaofu. Nunn said neither Canada nor its allies would be deterred from sailing in international waters. Quote, Canada will continue to sail where international law allows, including the Strait, the South China Sea, Nunn said in an interview from Singapore. Quote, and really our overall goal is to increase the peace and stability of this region. That's why we're going to continue to see more of Canada in this region as set in our Indo-Pacific strategy. We've already seen unsafe intercepts and have addressed those appropriately with China in terms of the Royal Canadian Air Force pilots. Actors in this region must engage responsibly, and that's the bottom line. So yeah, things are a bit spicy over there. But we're moving on again to the Persian Gulf. This is a really weird story, actually. Let's see. Can I find anyone with really good factuality that I recognize? Not particularly. So we're going to go with this one because it is high factuality. Actually, we're going to go with the Hindu. The United Arab Emirates withdraws from U.S.-led maritime coalition. The United Arab Emirates, this is from May 19th, by the by, has withdrawn from U.S.-led maritime coalition tasked with securing tense Gulf waterways that are vital to global oil trade, it said on Wednesday. The UAE withdrew its participation in the 38-nation combined maritime forces 2 months ago, a foreign ministry statement said, without giving reasons for the move. Quote, as the result of our ongoing elevation of effectiveness, security, cooperation with all partners 2 months ago, the UAE withdrew its participation from the combined maritime forces, said the statement carried by the official WAN news agency. The Bahrain-quartered CMF was established in 2001, initially as a partisanship between 12 nations. It is active in crucial but troubled Gulf waters where tankers have been seized and attacked in recent months. A spokesman for the Global Maritime Forces said the UAE remains a partner nation despite putting its participation on hold. Quote, the CMF still includes 38 member nations, of which the UAE is one, Commander Timothy Hawkins told the Associated Press. Iran seized 2 tankers in a week in late April and early May, including one empty ship that was traveling between the UAE ports of Dubai and Fujairah. I can never pronounce this one. Fujairah. I know that's wrong, but oh well, we're going with it. Iran was also accused of launching a drone attack against an Israeli-owned tanker in November 2022, stoking tensions with the United States. Earlier this month, the U.S. said it was sending reinforcements to the Gulf, which carries at least a third of the world's seaborne oil after what it called increasing harassment by Iran. The commander of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, Vice Admiral Brad Cooper, later transited through the Strait of Hormuz in a guided missile destroyer along with British and French naval commanders. Iran responded by saying it is capable of ensuring the safety of the Gulf waters in cooperation with its neighboring countries. Quote, the UAE remains committed to responsibly ensuring the safety and navigation of it in its seas, the UAE statement said, adding that the major oil exporter is, quote, committed to peaceful dialogue and diplomatic engagement. Now, I bring this story up because it's interesting. China is making a very large move on the Persian Gulf. Recently, Saudi Arabia put aside some of its problems with Iran, despite Iran continuing to harass the waterways. And now you see this, and I think this has to do with a couple things. Now, it mentioned near the bottom of this article that the U.S. and Britain sent reinforcements to the Persian Gulf, but it's still a shadow of what the presence used to be. Part of that is because the U.S. geopolitical priorities are shifting. A lot more oil is being produced in the United States, and the U.S. has really only ever protected the Persian Gulf for the oil flow into Europe. As the U.S. is becoming a little more isolationist as time goes on, and shifts more and more to the Pacific, our Navy is being retooled for that mission as well. Far more deep water ships, less patrolling vessels, and we will begin to selectively police waterways like the Strait of Taiwan, for example. And as a result, the secured global shipping that we've had for 80 years since the end of World War II is coming to a close. And Iran knows that. And as they recognize that, other countries in the region are starting to recognize it too. And I think they're starting to realize, okay, we need to kind of work with the Chinese here a little bit because they're less of a fair weather friend. But at the same time, like the Saudis and the UAE might try to make nice with the Iranians simply for their own benefit, because they recognize if there's going to be less force projection by the U.S. in the Persian Gulf, they need to figure out a way to have a less antagonistic relationship with their neighbors that are the ones attacking all of the ships. So I think that's some of what you're seeing here. It's a slow, gradual change, but it's definitely interesting and one that I definitely think needed to be highlighted. But we are now going to move on to our last story. This is from 4 days ago. This is from, Japan Today. Well, we're really getting a wide variety of sources here. Fighting escalates in Sudan's capital after the ceasefire expires. Fighting intensified in several areas of Khartoum on Sunday after a ceasefire deal expired. Residents of Sudan's capital reported. An activist said a new outburst of violence in North Darfur state had left at least 40 people dead. The ceasefire between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, had started on May 22nd and expired on Saturday evening. Brokered by Saudi Arabia and the United States, it calmed the fighting slightly and allowed limited humanitarian access, but like previous truces, was repeatedly violated. Talks to extend the ceasefire broke down on Friday. The deadly power struggle, which erupted in Sudan on April 25th, has triggered a major humanitarian crisis in which more than 1.2 million people have been displaced within the country and caused another 400,000 to flee into neighboring states. It also threatens to destabilize the region as a whole. Live footage on Sunday showed black smoke billowing above the capital. Quote, in southern Khartoum, we are living in terror of violent bombardment, the sound of anti-aircraft guns, and power cuts, said a 34-year-old resident, Sarah Hassan, by phone. Quote, we are in hell. We are in real hell. Among other areas where fighting was reported were central and southern Khartoum and Badri across the Blue Nile in the north. Beyond the capital, deadly fighting has also broken out in Darfur and as far west of Sudan. In the far west of Sudan, already grappling with long-running unrest and huge humanitarian challenges. Witnesses reported that heavy fighting on Friday and Saturday had brought chaos to Khartoum, one of the main towns and a commercial hub in North Darfur. At least 40 people were killed and dozens more wounded, including residents of the Kasab camp, in which houses people displaced by earlier unrest, said the Darfur Bar Association, which monitors rights in the region. The army denied claims that the RSE, which developed out of Darfur militias and has a power base in the region, had taken over Khartoum. Witnesses said a military plane had crashed in Omdurman, one of the 3 cities around the circumference of the Nile that make up the greater capital region. There is no comment from the army, which has been using warplanes to target RSF spread out across the capital. Separately, Sudanese antiquities authorities said RSF fighters had withdrawn from the National Museum in central Khartoum. On Saturday, the RSF released a video filmed inside the grounds of the museum, which houses ancient mummies and other precious artifacts, denying they had harmed the collection. Fighting in the capital has led to widespread damage and looting, a collapse in health services, power and water cuts, and dwindling food supplies. In recent days, the first rains of the year have fallen, heralding in the start of a rainy season that runs till around October and brings flooding and a heightened risk of waterborne diseases. The rains could complicate a relief effort already hampered by the bureaucratic delays and logistical challenges. Aid workers have warned that dead bodies have been left out in the streets and uncontrolled rubbish has been piling up. Saudi Arabia and the United States said they were continuing to engage daily with delegations from the Army and the RSF, which had remained in Jeddah even though talks to extend the ceasefire were suspended. Quote, those discussions were focused on facilitating humanitarian assistance and reaching an agreement on near-term steps the parties must take before the talks resume. The 2 countries said in a statement. The RSF leader Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, known as Hemeti, said in a Facebook post that he had spoken by phone to the Saudi foreign minister to discuss the mediation efforts. Hemeti's whereabouts are unclear, though he appeared in video footage with his troops in central Khartoum earlier in the fighting. So yeah, this whole thing's a mess. I bring it up because we shouldn't forget about it. This region tends to get forgotten about too often, and if more people knew about what's going on and cared about it, perhaps might be a better region. I don't know. It's also worth noting that the RSF, which is one of the main belligerents here, big ties to Wagner. But that's all I've got for today. This is World in Context Live, the show where we try to go a little bit deeper than the headlines, give a bit of a background on things, a little historical context here and there. I've been your host, Ryan Osborne, and I hope to see you again. Have a nice one.